We have this afternoon Moira Regan Bell, who has agreed to be interviewed as part of our interview process. I'd like to thank you, Moira, for contributing.
My pleasure.
To the project. And what I'd like to do is start off with some background and personal information just for context. And then we'll get into what I like to call the meat of the matter. So to begin with, I'd like to ask you, where were your parents born?
Okay, so my mother was born in Ireland and my father was born in England. They both emigrated. My mother first to the States in the early 50s and my father directly to Canada in the mid 50s. So I am a first generation Canadian.
Okay, and where were you born?
I was born in Montreal.
Okay, and where did you receive your education, your elementary, secondary, and any post-secondary?
Almost everything was in Quebec. I went to an English elementary school. At the time, I actually grew up in across the street from a French elementary school. And when my parents went to sign me up there, they told me that I couldn't. They told them that I couldn't go because there was an English school in town, and I should be sent there. And I did then high school, Cégep, did my degree at McGill, and then later did a few courses post my back in Toronto.
Okay, and what is or was your occupation?
I was an elementary school teacher. I also sat as a commissioner on a school board for a good number of years, from 98, I believe, until 2014, and was the chair of that board from 2007 to 2014.
Okay, and where do you live now?
I live in Montreal after many, many years on the South Shore.
Okay. All right, we're going to get into your reflections on your experience in living in Quebec today. I'm going to start off by asking you, what is the best thing in your experience right now about living in Quebec?
Right now.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Right now, it's a little bit different. Like I would say, normally, I would say the culture is the best thing about living in Quebec. Now, I think it's proximity to some things that are of interest to us, proximity to the mountains, to places we like to vacation, and my family. My family is still here, so that's a big deal for me. My extended family, my siblings.
Mm-hmm. Now, a lot of people have difficulty with this, and I completely understand. So if you'll answer the question directly, but you could then elaborate on the reasons for your response. Describe your relationship to Quebec in a single word.
Complicated. I love it here, but I hate what's happening here. And I think we get into it in some other questions, but I feel like I'm an outsider now in a place that I never was. So it makes it difficult because I love so much I love the city. I love the surroundings of the city too, like the Eastern Townships and up north and even further, going to Tadoussac and things like that. But when you're not feeling as welcome as you should be because I was born here, then it causes some really difficult feelings.
Okay, well, that leads us to our next question, which is, where do you feel most at home in Quebec? For example, in communities based on language, culture, profession, or geographic location?
Well, I would definitely say it's not the three former, but the geographic location. I love living in Montreal. It's where I feel the most, even though I grew up on the South Shore and I spent most of my adult life on the South Shore. I love living downtown. I love everything about it. The proximity to everything. Montreal is such a walkable city. It's a great place to live.
Okay. Now, the next question has had people often ask me about the second part, and I'll explain that and then I'll ask the question.
Okay.
The part talks about the official definition of Quebec, and people say, well, according to who? Very good question. And my response is, it could be any official definition that you've either come across or come to either embrace or reject. The government's official definition, what the media is pushing, what your peers appear to be interpreting as the official definition. So I'm going to go ahead and ask the whole question, and you can respond in any way you see fit. How would you define a Quebecer or Quebecois, Quebecoise? Do you think the official definition in Quebec includes you?
Okay, so first of all, how would I define it? I would define it as anybody from, regardless of where they're from, who calls Quebec home is a Quebecer. I don't think I've been to other places in the world where you come from makes you not a part of the community you're in at this moment. And do I think it includes me? Actually, I used to, but I don't anymore. I don't feel that the government definition of a Quebecer really includes me. And there's things I wonder about. I have no certificate of eligibility, even though I went to English school. And my parents, neither one of them was educated here in Canada in English. So am I entitled to English health services when the time comes for me to need them more than I need them now? I don't know. So how can you feel included when basic rights and services might not be available to you?
Okay, and some of these questions that I will be asking, you will probably have already answered in some of your other responses, but I'm going, for the record, I want to ask them anyway. And this one is a great example because you probably just answered a lot of the question I'm about to answer in your previous response to the previous question. Has your sense of identity as a Quebecer changed over the years? And if so, in what ways?
For sure. First of all, I would say it ebbs and flows. It's certainly not static and one way or the other. I grew up in a predominantly French town, and we were the others because we were the English kids on the street. So we sort of felt that we were, not really a part of the Quebec back then. But as a child, you're not really cognizant of it, except that everyone around you, and bear in mind, I wasn't allowed to go to French school. But everyone around you, we did teach a lot of the French kids on the street English, is different from you, and they're all the same. So then I left Quebec for 10 years when I was a young adult and moved to Toronto. Moved back after, and I feel that the time after I came back, so from the early 90s until just a few years ago, was the time that I felt most included here, most like I belong to the fabric of Quebec.
Okay.
Not much anymore. So here's the ebb and flow. Because now I don't feel like that.
Right. Okay. Well, again, you've touched on this, but I'm going to answer it for the record anyway. What are some of the most difficult things about living in Quebec?
I think it's one thing right now. It's divisive language politics, period.
Okay. All right. Well, in recent years, Quebec's Francophone majority has identified a number of linguistic and cultural threats. Which of these concerns do you share and support? And which of these concerns make you feel excluded or targeted?
Okay, so first of all, I don't feel that the threats are based on solid statistics. So it's hard to support them. I do believe that we need to do what is necessary to protect the French language, always. But you don't do that by punishing others. In the end, it's just going to lead to a weaker Quebec. Most Anglophones who live here can speak in French. So are we a threat if we can communicate, if we can live our lives in French? I don't really think so. So I think what's happening now ultimately will be to the detriment of all of Quebec.
Okay. What would you say at this moment in time, what is the biggest problem facing Quebec and how could it be resolved?
Okay, well, resolved, I don't know. But again, I'm going to say the biggest problem is the divisive language politics that we have been experiencing. How could it be resolved? Well, so I think that's maybe multifaceted too, because I think it would help if we had a federal government that was willing to step in and protect minority Anglophone rights too. That would be a first step. And I think also that our own provincial government needs to be focusing on what's really important now. And it's not language, it's economics, it's healthcare, it's education. But what they're doing now is very isolating, I think, not just for the province, because I think ultimately it will be very bad for them, but for Quebec as a province. But I think what you have is Francophones, especially in rural communities, who will be isolated from the rest of the world. You have Anglophones who won't feel at home here, so are they going to stay? So you need to focus on making Quebec the vibrant place that it could and should be.
Okay. The next question is an unabashed, and I've told Guy I was going to use this, kind of tip of the hat to Guy. He used this in his interviews very effectively. So I'm going to use it in this question. So I'd like you to indicate by a show of fingers on a scale of 1 to 10, 1 being weak and 10 being the strongest, how strongly do you feel that the joys of living in Quebec outweigh the challenges?
I'll give you a 5.
Fair enough. Okay, Moira. Lastly, is there anything else that you would like to say about your sense of identity or belonging in Quebec?
Okay, so I think it's fair to say that I have enjoyed living here for most of my life. I've really loved it. I love so much about this province, but I'm doubtful that I will stay here because, first of all, I have 5 children, 3 of whom have left with French language abilities and built lives, really good lives outside of here. The 2 remaining, I think one of them will be gone soon. And I don't know if I keep feeling more and more isolated it's not isolated so much because, it's not people who are isolating you. That is definitely not happening. But do I want to stay here if I don't feel I have adequate services? If I don't feel like we're welcome? And, I remember having this argument with a Francophone friend many, many years ago, like 30 years ago. And she told me then that I could never really be a Quebecer, because even though I was born here, I was not French mother tongue. So I thought most of that had gone away, but it's all coming back now. So that's, not sure how I feel anymore.
Hey, Moira, I'd like to thank you very much for your contribution and time today in our interview. I'm going to turn the recording off and we can have a little brief chat